But the point I want to make is, here's the mathematical statement of the problem. He goes through a whole series of deductions, and he culminates with a proof. Actually, he made a mistake first time round, and he had to go back and fix it. But the point about the proof is, it's entirely made in a mathematical language. Okay? There is nothing to be gained by looking at his brain. Right? You could sort of do neuromath. You say, no, actually, somehow if I knew something about Andrew Wiles's brain, I'd get an insight into that proof. And that's absolutely nonsense. The truth of that proof has absolutely nothing to do with his brain. The fact that he chose to work on that problem has something to do with his brain, and if he didn't have a brain, he couldn't have proved the theorem. But the correctness of the proof has nothing to do with psychology or neuroscience or any other field of science other than mathematics. Okay. It also has nothing to do with economics, how much he was paid, or the market for mathematicians. Okay. It's irrelevant. And it also has nothing to do with who he was trained by. All of those would be interesting exercises in themselves to understand something about Andrew Wiles, but they don't bear on the correctness of the proof. And what this tells you is that mathematics is truly emergent. Phenomena that are not emergent have to be explained by lower-level mechanisms. Right? If the proof of that conjecture, or the proof or the correctness of his proof, depended on knowing something about his brain, it would suggest that the thing that you're looking at is not an emergent thing. And here's a little bit of a slightly ugly picture, but I'm just going to make this statement slightly differently. Imagine this at the lower level is the biophysical level. This might be the level of his brain. That brain is operating according to a set of basic rules and principles. Okay? And out of those rules and principles comes mind, and mind manipulates mathematical symbols using some logical system. Okay? That's just a true statement. And the key point about emergence is that, as I said before, to understand the progress of the mathematical concept, you don't have to look at the lower levels. They're making progress too. Andrew Wiles's brain is also changing in time. But it's not material. And there are very good reasons for that. And in our field, we call those mechanisms of protection, made very famous by actually some SFI-affiliated physicists, David Pines and Robert Laughlin, where they call this the principle of mesoscopic protectorates. What makes it possible to ignore lower levels? Somehow they're screened off from the phenomenon at hand. We would call those also mechanisms of robustness. Okay. Now, within this framework, Voltaire and Châtelet were emergentist. They were saying, yes, there are rules of physics, and if you're making physical measurements, you need to know them. But if you're making measurements at a higher level, even though they're operating, they're not material. Leibniz was a reductionist, and within this framework, this is what that means. It means to understand the temporal evolution of every level, every hierarchy of phenomena, the only real way to understand their evolution is to look at the most reduced level. This is the kind of position of people like Steven Weinberg. And even Roger Penrose to a certain degree, right? That if I want to understand things like consciousness, I really have to understand physics. Right? Everything else is an epiphenomenon. This is a manifestly false statement, and the reason I gave the mathematical example is because I think that one's incontestable. So that's a bit on emergence, right? Emergence is this interesting phenomenon where different levels appear supported by mechanisms of protection that allow explanations to be provided that are equally rigorous at almost an infinite number of distinct levels. Right? So that, come back to, it's kind of profound, because it means that poetry operating according to its own rules, is every bit as rigorous as mathematical physics.